Hello everyone, thanks for coming back to hear what else I saw in May that I haven't already told you about. Up first is 1957's Johnny Tremain. Hal Stallmaster plays the titular young hero, a promising silversmith's apprentice in Boston, 1773. When his hand is injured, he struggles to find new employment until he's invited to work covertly for the Sons of Liberty. This was one of those glossy, live-action Technicolor films that Walt Disney made in the 1950s. Don't let its being a family film scare you off. Despite its adolescent protagonist, it's not exclusively for kids. I found plenty to enjoy in this adaptation of Esther Forbes' award-winning novel, which, admittedly, I haven't read. The acting can be corny at times, but the story is interesting, and for the most part, I liked the way fictional characters were woven into key events at the beginning of the American Revolution. It takes dramatic liberties, and I had to fight not to roll my eyes in some spots. Of course Johnny meets this famous person. Of course he's present for this big moment. Of course he participates in this big event. Of course he is gonna be the one who does this thing and saves the day. But I found the history fairly accurate otherwise, and if you're an American Revolution buff, or even just a little bit of a nerd, you'll have a couple moments where you call out, "Hey, they said the thing!" Richard Bamer plays a young patriot who befriends and recruits Johnny. Sebastian Cabot chews the scenery as a wealthy Tory, and the ubiquitous Whit Bissell appears as an eminent attorney and secret revolutionary. Paul Revere, Dr. Warren, and Sam Adams are all there, and they're treated with reverence, but they don't glow. We see them as regular men, dissenting with each other's methods or motivations. And then Jeff York steals a scene as James Otis, giving a piercing speech at a pivotal moment. Then the last act, where it goes into the battles of Lexington and Concord, is basically a war movie, and that part, plus the hand-burning scene, which was a little shocking and disturbing, is where it shows that it's not really for little kids. We've got redcoats and militiamen firing at each other. They don't use bayonets, but men do get shot and drop dead, so while I do think that this can be a good way to teach kids about the period, maybe it's not for the younger children. It's a worthy film, though. It's on the short side and breezes past some significant events between 73 and 75, but what it did cover, it covered pretty well in its way. Plus, it showcases some lovely matte paintings in the background. Movie number 2 is 1983's The Right Stuff. Directed by Philip Kaufman, who adapted the screenplay from the book by Tom Wolfe, this film recounts the first 16 years or so of the American space program. Motivated by competition with the Soviet Union, the escalating race results in tremendous technological innovations and an enormous achievement for mankind. The film boasts a great ensemble cast where every major character gets a piece of the pie. Sam Shepard plays the fastest man alive, Chuck Yeager, who quietly persists in moving the goalpost forward. Fred Ward and Dennis Quaid are the hotshot Air Force pilots, Gus Grissom and Gordo Cooper. Scott Glenn is naval test pilot Alan Shepard, and Ed Harris is Marine John Glenn. Does anybody else think it's funny that they got Harris playing Glenn, Glenn playing Shepard, and Shepard playing Yeager? It's almost like the casting director was trolling us or something. The supporting cast is equally impressive, especially the long-suffering wives played by Pamela Reed, Veronica Cartwright, Barbara Hershey, Mary Jo Deschanel, whose husband Caleb Deschanel was director of photography. Royal Dano has a small role as a character. I don't know what his job is officially, but he becomes symbolic, like an angel of death. We first see him bringing bad news to a widow. He sings at her husband's funeral. He's there at the next test. He's often seated by the door at the bar that the pilots frequent. So it's like he's this omnipresent reminder that mortality is just a step away. Lance Henriksen plays another one of the astronauts. Donald Moffat plays then-Senator Lyndon Johnson as an impatient jerk, which was hilarious. And I didn't know this at the time, but Chuck Yeager himself has a fun cameo. The film is fairly serious for the first half hour or so, and then Jeff Goldblum and Harry Shearer show up as a pair of agents who keep bringing the government bad news, and they are very goofy, and then there are more funny scenes during the training segment, including some stuff that you shouldn't watch with the kids, and you probably don't want to watch with your parents either. It was pretty awkward. I think my favorite gag in the movie comes when Alan Shepard has been sitting on the launch pad for hours waiting for the go-ahead, and eventually he needs to go to the bathroom. They keep telling him to hold on, and as the delay continues, we cut away to shots of a fire hose, a water cooler, someone drinking, a guy leaving a bathroom, and this really emphasizes his growing desperation, but it also comes at a point when you're 2 hours into the movie already. So I wonder if this editing was also a cheeky jab at anyone in the audience who might be wanting to take a potty break. The score combines excerpts of classical music with a more modern sound, 1983 modern, and that's unique. I especially enjoyed the use of Mars from Hosts the Planets for Glenn's Blast-Off. They did a great job integrating stock footage, and in general, the special effects are smooth. There are a few things later on where you can tell, okay, that's computer generated, but for the most part, things looked legit. It is an awfully long movie, with a few things I think could have been cut or tightened up to at least get it under 3 hours. By the end of it, my eyes were pretty tired, I did have to go to the bathroom, and I felt a little peeved. That fan dance sequence that comes almost at the end of the movie and just goes on and on and on, yeah, it was awkward to watch with my parents, but it was also just ridiculous and felt kind of self-indulgent. I can imagine some people saying, yeah, but it represents this, oh, it's a beautiful display, blah, 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 ethereal. It was too long. It was absurd. Also, I kind of got the sense that this was 2 or 3 movies squashed together. But they wanted to show the big picture of the space race, and to do this great American story and its players justice, they had to be thorough. There's a lot to pack in, breaking the sound barrier, the rigorous testing of the pilots to shape them into astronauts, the friction between them dissolving into a bond as they stand up to government pressure, and then the pressure on their wives being hounded by the press as they anxiously watch to see if this will be the time that someone doesn't make it back. The film is about the space race, but it's also about these personalities who were affected by it. And you come away with a clear and hopefully accurate picture of what made these heroic pilots tick. Gradually, we see that they each had an ideal combination of skill, instinct, stamina, bravado, and insanity, and I guess that's the right stuff. Movie number 3 is 1960's Cone of Silence, which has no connection to the Cone of Silence gag from the 60s TV show Get Smart. This British film, released in the US as Trouble in the Sky, features Bernard Lee as Captain Gort, a pilot under investigation after an incident with his jetliner results in the death of his co-pilot. Michael Craig plays a trainer who finds himself caught in the middle of the blame game, complicated by his attraction to Gort's daughter, Elizabeth Seal. The cast also features Peter Cushing as a persnickety inspector and George Sanders as a shrewd attorney leading the Inquisition. You get just one scene of Cushing and Sanders together, but what a treat for the ears. It's part courtroom drama, of sorts, part subtle thriller that does a good job adding layers of tension and juggling the conflicts among the characters. There's something that seemed evident early on. I'm not sure if it really was, or I just had some freak intuition, but as things begin stacking up, it does become a case where something is clear to the audience, and we're on tenterhooks waiting for someone in the movie to reach the same conclusion. And I found that suspense, as you wait for the other shoe to drop, particularly effective. Movie number 4 is 1950's Quicksand, where Mickey Rooney stars as a car mechanic who borrows $20 from the cash register to take out a girl he just met. He intends to pay it back before anyone notices, but this little act of larceny launches him on an ever-escalating crime spree. There are a lot of copies of this movie out there, but good luck finding a print that looks great and isn't cropped. The one I settled on was decent and it didn't have any ads, but I had to try 3 others first. This is a good noirish story, aptly titled, with all the classic ingredients, and the moral couldn't be any clearer. I found it challenging to sympathize with Rooney's character. From the get-go, he's arrogant and he's mean about his pathetic ex-girlfriend. He acts like a tough guy, he wants to show off. He's very irritating, and due to Rooney's naturally youthful appearance, even though he's 30 here, he seems like a kid trying to act like a grown-up. It doesn't help that his femme fatale seems noticeably older and wiser. That's Jean Cagney, James Cagney's younger sister, who plays her streetwise role with an edge. She's determined to get what she wants, and she has lofty tastes, which should make it obvious that she's bad news, but our guy is blind to the warning signs. Peter Lorre plays her former boss, and maybe ex. It's another Weasley part for him, but Lorre does what he can with it. It's interesting that he and Rooney play romantic rivals. Either they're insinuating that this lady prefers short guys, or they went with this casting so a fight between them would seem like a more even match. The result is a decent morality tale, pretty short and simple, with a foreseeable downward spiral, but not dissatisfying. Movie number 5 is a Korean War film, 1953's Ceasefire. With armistice on the horizon, American soldiers anticipate their final day of fighting, but first they have to get through one last mission. The draw here is that this film, made by Owen Crump, was shot entirely in Korea during the conflict, with actual soldiers, real ammo, etc., and, as if it needed anything else, it's in 3D. It plays like a documentary until the soldiers start talking, and even then it's in a class of its own. Although I'm sure some scenes are reenactments, the photography is consistent, maintaining the as-it-happened gimmick. The no-frills approach is given a little zhuzh in post with a lush music score by Dmitri Tiomkin. And while the film isn't exactly big on character development, they do manage to weave in some subplots. The acting is what it is. These guys aren't actors, they're soldiers, and if they're a little stiff, I cut them some slack. Especially because this is the middle of a war, and they've got a giant camera in their faces. It's a weird situation. I did think that they were at least as good, if not better, than the guys who played themselves in the 1517 to Paris. A lot of the dialogue has been dubbed, which is understandable given that these scenes were shot outside in a wide open space, and it's not like they could be toting a boom mic around. I just don't know if the dubbed lines are close to what was actually being said, or if they were completely rewritten to make a cohesive narrative. There are better, more polished Korean War movies out there, but this does have some special properties that make it an interesting watch. Number 6 is a rewatch, 1945's The Story of G.I. Joe. In this World War II movie based on the columns of war correspondent Ernie Pyle, Pyle, played by Burgess Meredith, joins the U.S. infantry in the trek across North Africa into Italy. This is one of the finest combat-focused movies of the 1940s, an honest tribute to the perseverance and spirit of American servicemen. Burgess Meredith shines in a rare lead performance. He was serving as a captain in the Army at the time of his casting, so he had to be honorably discharged in order to assume the role. The real Ernie Pyle took some convincing, but after spending time with Meredith in person, he gave him his blessing. Pyle himself was killed 2 months after the film's premiere while covering the Battle of Okinawa. At first, Pyle struggles to keep up with the younger, fitter guys of C Company, and they razz him for it. But after traveling with other units and toughening up himself, he returns to C Company, and they welcome him like an old friend. The film was directed by William Wellman, who made judicious use of stock footage. He included a couple real war correspondents in one scene, and he had actual veterans of the battles that are being reenacted in the film as extras, and the actors were encouraged to mingle with them on the set. Wellman's own wife even has a small part as a war bride. Robert Mitchum co-stars in one of his first major roles, following 2 years in Hollywood that were busy, but mostly with bit parts, often playing servicemen. For his turn as the commanding officer who leads his men with a firm but compassionate hand, he received his only Oscar nomination. The rest of the cast includes an ensemble of engaging and somewhat eccentric characters, which is something I always love to see in an old war movie, especially an infantry one. I had forgotten a lot since I saw this years ago, but there were a couple things that came back to me as soon as I saw them. One thing I remembered was all the mud, and I did remember the sergeant who carries a recording of his son's voice through the whole movie looking for a functioning phonograph. There are some good action sequences, including one in a bombed-out Italian city, and there's a memorable stretch where the men are camped below a monastery, trudging up and down a hill through downpours and copious mud. As the battle drags on, Pyle grows weary of the loss of life. But his written record and this film stand as a testament not of superhuman strength, but of the soldiers' matter-of-fact approach to the challenge before them, which they keep plugging away at. Movie number 7 is 1967's The Hellbenders. In this post-Civil War spaghetti western, Joseph Cotton's Southern colonel leads his 3 sons and a woman posing as an officer's widow across the West, carrying a coffin full of stolen money that will fund their effort to take the Confederacy back from the Union. So, Joseph Cotton is a bad guy in this. Can't have them all. This was made during a period in Cotton's career when decent offers in Hollywood were growing scarce, so he traveled overseas, taking lead parts from foreign filmmakers who were excited to snag an American movie star. This movie was directed by Sergio Corbucci, who apparently knew what he had in Joseph Cotton because he lets him shine. And he crafts a decent thriller. The use of dramatic zooms and music stings is comically heavy-handed, and there's one character who is super annoying, but at least she didn't stick around for too long. It's kind of crazy that the colonel believes he and his dopey sons are going to wage and win the whole war again by themselves. At least his youngest son, played by Julian Mateos, has more brains and is a decent guy, though his tactic for getting a woman to come along with them and be their cover is pretty risky. This lady is played by Norma Bengal, who I think gives the most balanced and compelling performance as an observant, quick-thinking dance hall girl who manages to turn the tables several times. Her introduction to the story gives it a needed boost. We watched this on YouTube, and the quality was quite good. What I didn't like is that it was censored. We're watching, the first scene of violence comes along a few minutes in, and suddenly the screen goes black, and I'm like, what's going on? And then an ad popped up, so that's another thing not to like. It's one of those uploads, there are so many of them, that has an ad break like every 5 or 10 minutes. But I thought the black screen might be a quirky editing choice, and then it happened again and again, and I figured out the pattern, and my guess is that the uploader removed any frames they thought might violate YouTube's community guidelines. Now, I'm a YouTuber, I get it. I am careful about the images I show, not just because of big bad YouTube, but out of respect for my audience. I'm not a lover of gore, and I know a lot of my viewers are not also. However, if a movie has something in it that I would rather not see, I do my research, I read the parent's guide, see is there anything in this that's gonna be just a little bit too much for me, and I can either choose to watch the movie or not. If I do choose to watch the movie, I can just suffer through it, or I can look away, or I can fast forward, whatever. I have the freedom to do what I want. I don't want someone else censoring it for me. And in this case, it really messes up some scenes. You've got an attack or a shootout or something, and the screen keeps going black at like the most important moments, so you can't tell who shot who, how badly, who's dead. And this led to confusion, it's disjointed, and in a Western, it's just ridiculous. It completely neuters the intensity of the scene and the presentation of good versus evil that the filmmakers were trying to display. Other than that, and its bumpy beginning with some bad acting, and those pesky zooms, it ended up being pretty enjoyable. And if you watch it on Tubi, it's probably not censored. Movie number 8 is set during the Civil War, 1993's Gettysburg, the epic directed by Ronald F. Maxwell, who adapted the screenplay from a historical novel by Michael Shara. As the Confederate Army under General Robert E. Lee attempts to push further north into Pennsylvania, the Federal Army gets ready to meet them, culminating in a sprawling 3-day battle. As an American who loves American history, I am embarrassed to admit that I am not nearly as familiar with the battles of the Civil War as I am the battles of World War II or even the War for Independence. I know the names of major military engagements and major players, but who was leading what, when, and where? It runs together in my mind. I struggle to keep the timeline straight. I forget about a lot of people. So going into this, my knowledge of the details was shaky. I will say I felt like I got a better idea of how all of this went down watching this than I did reading about the battle in a couple pages in a textbook. Since I'm no expert, I can't attest to the accuracy of this depiction, but I thought it was good overall with regard to the reenactments of military action and the visuals. I was particularly impressed by the sounds of the battles, especially the cannon blasts and the musket fire. The cannons sounded amazing. There is hardly any gore, and not even much blood, and considering my mental image of Gettysburg is of a field flowing with the mingled blood of Northern and Southern soldiers, this surprised me, but at least some of the film was shot at the real location, and maybe they didn't want to sully it, even for the sake of realism. The bodies still pile up at an astonishing rate, and even without R-rated blood and guts, it drives home the tremendous loss of life across these 3 days. I felt the main battle scenes were the best parts. My mom found them a little too lengthy, and I absolutely get where she's coming from, and definitely the last one does go on and on and on. But I think all of those sweeping camera shots of the artillery and the prolonged section of Pickett's charge marching forward and the music swelling again and again and again is justified because this is it. This is the legendary battle, the event that the movie's named after and the place where Lincoln gave his speech. This is kind of what everything has been driving toward, and it would be weird if after all that setup, they skimped on the final showdown. The best part to me, though, was the Battle of Little Round Top. It was easy enough to follow, even for me. It kept track of the main players as the chaos escalated without ever slowing down the action. The location provided interesting visuals. The enemy waves, hooting and hollering, were formidable. From a reenactment perspective, but also a dramatic perspective, it was very effective. And it impressed on me how very intense this fighting was. Getting everyone into position takes time, and it seems like there's a lot of time where people are just waiting. But once the combat begins, it moves quickly, and it is very desperate. The fact that you can only fire your gun once and then you have to reload it and you're just there, an open target, is terrifying. And the enemy just keeps on surging forward. They want to wear you down. They go after the weak spots. If a commanding officer is taken down, they'll surge there, and it might very well be over for you at that point. They'll just keep on coming until they're right in your face and engaging you in brutal hand-to-hand combat. Now, I don't know what the movie may have gotten wrong, but it was clear there were parts they glossed over. Things would be referred to after the fact, and I found that disappointing. Why are they talking about something that happened instead of letting us see it? However, if they covered every part of the battle, even just in shorthand form, the movie would be another 2 hours long. And that is an issue I had. I thought The Right Stuff was long. This is over 4 hours, and if you watch the director's cut, which is what I got from the library, it's nearly 5 hours. In my opinion, this should have been a television miniseries. I needed some episode breaks in there. We had to split it across 2 nights, and I decided to stop it at dawn of day 2 of fighting, which turned out to be probably the best place. But I thought we were halfway through, and it turned out there were another 3 hours left. It also should have been a miniseries because, well, the visuals and some of the performances felt like they belonged in a television production. The cast is pretty good overall. I thought Jeff Daniels as Colonel Chamberlain gave the best performance. His main accent sounded mostly okay. He did have one line reading that sounded kind of Kennedy, but his character is well fleshed out. We see examples of his leadership qualities, but also get insight into his character, his personality, particularly through interactions with his aide-de-camp, who is also his younger brother, played by C. Thomas Howell, who sounds more Southern for some reason. I also liked Chamberlain's fiery Irish sergeant and mentor, played by Kevin Conway. Sam Elliott makes a strong appearance early on, and Stephen Lang is pretty memorable as a flamboyant, battle-hungry General Pickett. It's Tom Berenger who receives top billing as General Longstreet. I didn't find his performance that engaging or compelling, and his listening expression looked more bored than pensive to me. But maybe it's just hard to see beyond that rug on his face. Martin Sheen is also surprisingly mild as Robert E. Lee. He's very soft-spoken. I don't know if that's accurate, it could be, but it made Lee seem kind of weak. And then there were some performances that just were not good. The actors playing the British observer and the actor turned scout are both awfully hammy. They're just acting too aggressively. I don't mean that the characters are aggressive, I mean they never felt like real people. The British guy, he comes into a scene carrying a teacup the whole time, and it was like, we get it. You're British. I also found a lot of the facial hair dodgy and distracting. Now, I don't care for big, bushy, gnarly beards anyway, but we've got some obviously fake beards here. It was actually kind of shocking how bad some of them looked. Lee looked okay, but he was too well coiffed. He soft and fluffy. What's going on? Longstreet? Yikes. I feel like I could see where it was glued on. And it was so over-groomed and just exaggerated that then, when he shows up in a couple scenes later on, and the actor's wearing a totally different beard, like totally different style and shape and everything, the texture was different. It was crazy. I can't believe that they thought we wouldn't notice. And Jeff Daniels, to his credit, does an admirable job emoting around his walrus stash. That thing looked ridiculous. And it must have been kind of challenging for him. I think of him as a mouth actor, if you know what I mean. But he managed to convey a lot of different emotions. So props to him. He's the real standout here. I did like the movie, long as it was. I might wish for fewer rousing speeches and introspective monologues, but I appreciate the time was taken to humanize these generals. It focuses almost exclusively on high-ranking officers, so if you want to know about the plight of the common foot soldier, you gotta watch something else. And it focuses on strategy and tactics and what ended up happening. But it does include discussions about why they're fighting on both sides, and it avoids the ignorant oversimplification that everyone in the North was passionate about freeing the slaves and everyone in the South was passionate about keeping them in bondage. It doesn't delve too deeply into ideology, that's not its purpose, but it shows the inner conflict and confusion. It touches on a variety of perspectives, and I think the downtime is filled with valuable conversations. But ultimately, the battle sequences are where the film really shines. That mini-review was awfully long, but that's what else I saw in May. I hope you enjoyed this collection of reviews. You can find a list of the films in the description. Go ahead and share what you think of any of these titles in the comments below if you'd like, and I'll be back next Saturday. Thanks for watching.